Hi guys, Brexiteers like those who used to advise Liz Truss are getting worried about the Labour Party taking power, as they fear that Tony Blair will convince the next British government to align with the EU on standards. This, in their opinion, is a bad idea because it would mean that the UK can't diverge and get wonderful trade deals with the rest of the world. Here Mark Littlewood, a highly influential Brexiteer, issued a warning about a massive threat to Brexit. However, he doesn't seem to understand what he's talking about.
Who's pulling the strings? Tony Blair never seems to be too far away. He's hovering in the background. Is he the puppet master? And more to the point, does this closer ties mean death by 1,000 treaties? Is it Brexit being undone on the quiet?
Yeah, that's my real worry, Martin. I'm not so worried that Tony Blair will be the Prime Minister and Keir Starmer if Labour were to win in name only. But Tony Blair's clearly a huge figure in the Labour Party, and what he says is listened to by the leader of the Labour Party. But look, I've got really bad news for you and for your viewers and for anyone who voted for Brexit. And that's that this argument is never going to go away. It would be nice to think that we'd clarified it, closed it down, that's it. I know it took 5 years and endless wrangling. But look, in fairness, the question of what should our relationship be with countries on the continent and the EU is always going to be a topic of debate. Now, here's my worry, that what the Labour Party will do is slowly realign us with EU regulation. And they will argue that that will facilitate trade with the EU. And on that narrow point, they might be right. But it proves to be a huge barrier to actually negotiating trade deals with the rest of the world. Because you're sat down saying, we've already signed up to all of this with the EU. We can't negotiate with you about financial services standards, pharmaceutical standards, because we've bought the whole EU rule book, hook, line and sinker. So what I'd like to see this government do before the election is to tie down some more trade deals and, crucially, get our membership of what's called CPTPP. I think I got that right over the line. That's the Common Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership. And if you start wedding yourselves into those deals, then it actually becomes harder for a future government to re-embed us in the EU's regulatory orbit.
And that's the goal of Brexiteers, is to diverge as much as possible from EU standards, where it becomes practically impossible or extremely difficult for a future government to realign with EU standards. That's what their goal is. And the standards that he's talking about are not high standards, they're lower standards. They're not equivalent to EU standards. Now, where I have to call out the BS is where he says, well, you know, if we align with EU standards, which he claims the Labour Party want to do, then it'll be very difficult to do trade deals with other countries. But that doesn't make any sense. And I explain why. Because there are many non-EU countries that align with the EU on standards. For example, Turkey, Iceland, Norway implement various EU standards while they're not members of the European Union. Canada, yes, Canada, who the UK want to have a trade deal with, well, they align with the EU on environmental protections and workers' rights. These standards. Of course, these are standards that the likes of Mark Littlewood would prefer to do away with. The USA, which of course Brexiteers claim is the jewel in the crown when it comes to post-Brexit trade deals, well, the US already align with the EU on in a number of areas, including produce, for example, organic produce. So if you go into a supermarket in Europe, you'll find things like peanut butter. If it's produced organically in the US, it can be sold in Europe because the standards align. And of course, Japan has a trade deal with the European Union and it aligns with EU standards in a whole number of sectors, including data protection. So when the Brexiteers say we need to diverge from EU standards in order to do trade deals, that's a pile of crap. It could actually help you do trade deals with non-EU countries if you align with EU standards, because those countries may already be aligning with EU standards in certain sectors. And if you say, well, our standards are the same, you're aligning with EU standards, we're going to align with EU standards, that could actually help you in a trade deal. Because the countries see EU standards as the gold standard, as a high standard. So that's why they align. If they align with EU standards, it facilitates their trade, non-EU countries, with the EU. Doesn't eliminate all the barriers. So when the Brexiteers once again say we need to diverge from EU standards in order to facilitate trade deals, to a certain extent they're correct, but generally that's not true. They're once again pulling the wool over people's eyes. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot.